the world was quick to forget them. A soldier still fighting a war that ended decades ago. A young man locked in a cell no one remembered to open. A woman left all alone in the middle of Siberia. And a girl who spent 11 days stranded in a deep, dark forest. These are the stories that remind us that sometimes the cruelest fate isn't dying, it's being forgotten. In 1939, Hiroo Onoda left home to work in Wuhan, China, but destiny had other plans. By 1942, the Imperial Japanese Army summoned him to fight for his country. He was drafted, trained, and transformed. Then came the orders to dedicate his life to save his motherland. On December 26, 1944, he was sent to Lubang Island in the Philippines. His mission? Destroy the airstrip, destroy the pier, and stop any Allied invasion at all costs. And then he was commanded never to surrender and never to die by his own hand, an order that he would carry with him for decades. When Onoda arrived in Lubang, he encountered officers who outranked him and prevented him from carrying out his mission, which aided United States and Philippine Commonwealth forces in capturing the island when they landed on the 28th of February 1945. Disorganization, conflict, and chaos ensued. But soon enough, the battle was over. Onoda did not believe it. He vanished into the dense mountains with 3 men, Akatsu, Shimada, and Kozuka, to continue a war that for the rest of the world had already ended. While Onoda continued to live his life as a war soldier, he didn't realize he was being watched. In 1974, Norio Suzuki, a Japanese adventurer traveling around the world, saw Onoda, interviewed him, and told him the war was over. But Onoda refused to believe him. So, Norio Suzuki carried photographs as proof of a man who had refused to surrender until direct orders came from his commanding officer. Meanwhile, the commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, was now a quiet bookseller, living in peace, carrying the weight of war on his shoulders. On March 9, 1974, Taniguchi stepped into the same jungle he had sent Onoda into 30 years before. The 2 men faced each other, and then, in a calm, steady voice, Taniguchi read the words that would finally end the longest war one man had ever fought. And then, for the first time in 29 years, Hiroo Onoda lowered his weapon. The next day, March 10, 1974, he surrendered at Lubang's raider base. At Malacanang Palace in Manila, before President Ferdinand Marcos, Onoda handed over his sword, his rifle, 500 rounds of ammunition, and grenades still ready to use. In his hand, he also carried a dagger, the one his mother had given him in 1944, to take his own life if captured. He never needed it. Marcos granted him a full pardon as the world watched in awe and disbelief. For 28 years, 6 months, and 8 days, Hiroo Onoda had lived in a war that ended without him. When he finally stepped into the sunlight, history had changed. Japan had changed, but he had not. He was still the soldier who never surrendered. He had been declared dead 15 years earlier, and now he walked amongst skyscrapers, neon lights, and strangers and machines that he had never seen before. The government offered him money, years of back pay for decades lost in the jungle, but he refused. When people pressed money onto his hands, he donated it to Yasukuni Shrine. When nothing could bring him peace, Onoda decided to leave. In 1975, he left Japan for Brazil, following his brother's path. There, he became a cattle farmer, settling for a life he had dreamt of during the days of war. Onoda married in 1976, became a leader in the Japanese-Brazilian community, and built something that felt like stability. But when he read of a Japanese teenager killing his parents in 1980, something inside him shifted. The Japan he once served, the one built on honor, restraint, and obedience, was gone. In 1984, he returned home once more as a teacher. Onoda opened the Onoda Nature School, a camp meant to rebuild what he believed Japan had lost: discipline, strength, respect for nature. In the years that followed, he split his life between Japan and Brazil, half in the land he fought for, half in the land that gave him peace. Even then, honors continued to find him. But for Hiroo Onoda, time never truly healed anything. On January 16, 2013, he died in Tokyo of heart failure brought on by pneumonia at the age of 91. The last soldier of a forgotten war was finally laid to rest. And while the world mourned for a forgotten hero, the other side of the world saw a civilian left to die in a cell he was never meant to be in the first place. It began on an ordinary day on April 1, 1979. 18-year-old Andreas Mihavecz, an Austrian bricklayer, sat in the back of a police car after a minor accident. It was merely a misunderstanding that should have ended with a few signatures and a warning, but it didn't. They placed him in a small, windowless holding cell beneath the Brigands police station, a place built with concrete walls, iron bars, and darkness resembling a cave. Then the door shut behind Andreas, and no one came back. 3 officers shared the responsibility that night. Each believed that the other 2 had released the boy. A simple assumption turned into a tragedy. As the clock ticked, Hours became days, then weeks. Above the dark trench-like confinement, the city carried on. Life carried on while the officers were completely unaware that beneath their feet, an 18-year-old boy was licking the condensed walls of the prison to satiate his thirst. Andreas screamed until his throat tore. He kicked the door until his feet bled. No one heard him. The cell was deep, sealed off by layers of concrete. His mother came to the station, begging for answers, but the officers dismissed her. They said he'd been released. They said she was worrying too much. Down below, Andreas tore at his clothes, bit his fingernails to be able to chew on something. Days later, he started to hallucinate. His voice gave out, his body trembled with cold. He began to lick the damp stone walls, searching for the thin film of condensation that gathered in the dark. It tasted of dust and rot, but it gave him life. Doctors later said that the moisture was the only thing that kept him alive. For him, day and night no longer existed. The darkness was constant as he continued hallucinating faces in the stone, voices whispering his name. 18 days passed. 18 days without food, without light, without a sound of another human being. And then finally, on the 19th of April, when they unlocked the door, the officers froze. Curled in the corner, barely breathing, was Andreas Mihavecz. His body had turned gray and skeletal. His eyes sank into his face, which no longer looked like that of a human. Andreas had lost 50 pounds. His body trembled with dehydration and shock. Yet, he was still conscious, hanging between life and death. Immediately, he was rushed to the hospital. Somehow, his organs held on. His mind, however, never fully came back. As he came back from the hospital, the first thing Andreas did was to sue the Austrian government. The officers were fined, and the world moved on. But Andreas never did. For the rest of his life, he couldn't sleep in the dark, couldn't stand small spaces. They called him a bureaucratic error. But for Andreas Mihavecz, it was a slow descent into madness, a living death inside 4 concrete walls. While Andreas detested the confines he was thrown into, the other side of the world witnessed a family that ran away from the shackles of society and built a home of their own. It was 1944, in the heart of this endless forest, when Agafia Lykova came into the world. Not in a hospital or a cabin, but in a hollowed-out pine washed up. Her parents, Karp and Aquilina, had fled deep into the Siberian wilderness years earlier, escaping Stalin's brutal crackdown of the religious sect, the Old Believers. They had built a life in complete isolation, cut off from the rest of humanity. The Lykov family wanted to be forgotten. Agafia was their 4th child, and the second to be born in exile. Their home stood 3,444 feet up a remote mountainside in the Abakan range, 150 miles from the nearest town. For 35 long years, Agafia knew no one but her family. Her world began and ended within the wilderness outside her wooden home. The only stories she heard of civilization came from her father's fading memories and the sacred pages of their Russian Orthodox Bible. To Agafia, the outside world was a myth, a cautionary tale told beside the fire pit. Then, one summer day in 1978, the impossible happened, at least for Agafia. A helicopter carrying 4 Soviet geologists circled above the dense canopy and spotted something no one expected to see. A small garden carved into the wild. As they landed and approached the area, they saw a barefoot woman staring at them in shock, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. It was Agafia. She had never seen a human outside her family before. Her speech, strange from years of isolation, left the scientists puzzled. One of them described it as a slow, blurred cooing. They thought she might be mentally disabled until they watched her move. The precision in which she handled tools, hunted, cooked, and sewed revealed a sharp, adaptive intelligence. Never in their dreams the geologists thought that they would be discovering something like this. Over time, as Agafia began to learn new words and ideas, her language bloomed. Writer Vasily Piskov, who documented her story, noted that her speech resembled ancient poetry filled with unexpected turns of phrase. For Agafia, contact with outsiders was both a revelation and a tragedy. It cracked open the sealed world of her childhood, but it also marked the beginning of loss. Her family, unaccustomed to new foods and microbes, began to die soon after. Agafia decided not to explore the outside world, so she continued her life in the wilderness, all alone. She is 70 years old now. In all those years, she has left her mountain only 6 times. The first was in the 1980s, when the Lykov's astonishing discovery made headlines across the Soviet Union. Reporters called her the woman who never knew civilization. The government invited her on a month-long tour, aiming to show her a glimpse of the modern world she had been hidden from since birth. For the first time, Agafia saw airplanes streaking across the sky. She saw cars rushing down asphalt roads, money changing hands, and cities bustling with noise. And she didn't like any of it. Agafia later said that the air and water outside her taiga made her sick, and that the roar of busy roads filled her with fear. Civilization wasn't the miracle people thought it was. To Agafia, it felt toxic. So she went back to her cabin, her garden, her God, to the only world that ever made sense. Even as age began to claim her strength, she refused to leave for good. In 2011, on her 69th birthday, Agafia formally rejoined the Bilokrinitskaya branch of the Old Believers during a rare visit from Metropolitan Kornili, a moment that brought her faith full circle. But faith couldn't stop time. By 2014, Agafia's letters carried a quiet desperation. She wrote publicly for the first time, asking anyone, a kind Christian soul, to come help her, confessing that her strength was fading and that she'd had a lump on her right breast. In 2016, the wilderness finally became too much. She was airlifted by helicopter after suffering severe leg pain, treated at a hospital in Tashtagul, and as soon as she could stand again, begged to be flown home. Agafia got her wish. By 2019, she was still there, alone, in the same forest where she was born. Her isolation drew unexpected allies. In 2021, Russian billionaire Oleg Deripaska funded the construction of a new log cabin for her. But Agafia was not alone after all. For 18 years, she had a neighbor, Hiroo, one of the geologists who first found her family. He built a hut near hers, saying he wanted to help her survive. But in truth, it was Agafia who cared for him. She chopped his firewood, cooked his food, and nursed him through the winters. Their companionship was fragile, part friendship, part burden. Twice, she said, he behaved sinfully, threatening her when loneliness took hold of his mind. Yet, when he died in 2015, Agafia buried him with tears in her eyes. Now, in her late 70s, Agafia still lives in the taiga, one of the last humans untouched by modern life. Some say Agafia Lykova is a relic of the past. Others say she's a reminder of everything we've lost. Speaking of loss, in December 1971, 17-year-old Juliane Koepcke boarded a flight and fell from the skies a few hours later, only to find herself all alone in a world that had completely forgotten her existence. The sky over the Amazon was alive that Christmas Eve. Inside Lanza Flight 508, Juliane Koepcke sat beside her mother, Maria, clutching a small graduation gift she'd received just a day earlier. It was supposed to be a celebration. She had just finished high school and they were heading home to Panguana to reunite with her father for Christmas. But fate, it seemed, had been waiting to meet them in the clouds. All the flights that week were sold out, except one, Lanza, a Peruvian airline her father had warned them to avoid. It's unsafe, he'd said, but the seats were there and time was running out, so they boarded. But halfway through the flight, turbulence began to rattle the cabin. Then, lightning struck the right wing. The plane shuddered violently as the fuselage ripped apart mid-air. Passengers screamed, metal shredded like paper, and the plane tore into several pieces. Juliane felt herself sucked into the sky, still strapped to her own row of seats, and then she fell into the clouds. A 10,000-foot long drop that would change the course of her life. She plummeted through a storm of debris, through clouds and winds, until the jungle rose to meet her. The thick canopy broke her descent, branches clawing at her as the seat spun, slowed, and finally crashed into the forest floor. When she opened her eyes, it was no longer Christmas Eve. The world was green, wet, and eerily quiet. She was alive but severely injured. Her collarbone had snapped, her right arm was gashed open, one eye was swollen shut. She could barely move. Around her, fragments of the aircraft and bodies lay scattered in the endless green. Juliane was now all alone. She had no food, no tools, no sense of direction. Only what her father had taught her in the years of studying the rainforest. Follow the water. Streams lead to rivers, and rivers lead to people. And so, she walked, limping, dizzy, and bleeding. She began her impossible journey through one of the deadliest ecosystems on Earth. Her only shoe slipped away in the mud. She waded through the waist-deep water by day and curled up under leaves at night, her broken body trembling in the humid dark. However, never once did she panic. Juliane's survival was not luck. It was discipline, the calm logic of a girl who refused to let nature take her hold. On the 9th day, she saw a small boat beside a hut. Finally, a sign of human life, but no one was there. She waited, drifting in and out of consciousness. When the loggers returned hours later, they found a girl, but she looked like a ghost. Mud rubbed all over her skeletal body, and hollow eyes that hinted that she may not be alive. But slowly, Juliane opened her eyes, and the loggers heard a story of a 1 in a million possibility of survival. Then, they poured gasoline on her wound to kill the maggots, carried her by canoe for 11 hours through the Amazon's endless maze of rivers, until finally, a helicopter took her to safety. Juliane Koepcke was the sole survivor among 92 passengers. 14 others had survived the crash, but died waiting for rescue. She was the only one who walked out of the jungle alive. When Juliane finally woke up in the hospital, the first thing she asked was for help to find her mother. After barely recovering, she joined the search parties trekking through the wreckage-strewn jungle where Flight 508 had disappeared. The air still smelled of fuel and decay. It took them weeks to find Maria's body, and finally, on January 12, 1972, Juliane found her mother, who was no longer alive. Decades later, the government of Peru honored her with the Order of Merit for Distinguished Services, a title for a woman who had once been forgotten by the world and who now stood as a symbol of endurance, knowledge, and the epitome of survival. From the wreckage of the airplane, Juliane built a life that proved survival isn't the end of a story, it's the beginning of a different one.